Good afternoon and welcome to Entropia's monthly professional development webinar. My name is Marquita Qualls, and I just wanted to give you a brief reminder for those of you who are new to the seminars. These are complimentary and open to anyone who is interested in learning more professional development tools. They are 30 minutes to fit your busy schedules, but keep in mind that they are condensed versions of workshops or coaching offerings that Entropia provides. And so if you are interested in hearing more about these sessions, please contact us to schedule full-length program delivery at entropiaconsulting.com, or you may call us at area code 202-455-0426. Again, just to share a bit about myself, as I said, my name is Marquita Qualls, and affectionately known within the scientific community as Dr. Q. I am a trained scientist, but I'm also a business professional who has had a variety of leadership positions in corporate and nonprofit environments. I was able to successfully navigate a career from the bench all the way to a global strategic management role at one of the world's leading pharmaceutical organizations. And one of the reasons that I attribute this to is having that unique combination of technical and soft skills that allowed me to make that transition between the scientific and the non-technical worlds. So being able to understand the science, but also understand the people and translate and transfer those skills back and forth. So when Entropia, my company, I started it, really in essence to assist professionals who are interested in developing and strengthening their skills that enable them to become more productive, more effective, and ultimately attain a greater work-life balance. So today, our professional development topic is something that all of us, I'm sure, have experienced at one point or the other. Some of you may be experiencing it right now, but we're going to talk today about recognizing and managing the conflict around you. 3 things we'll cover. First, we're going to identify types of conflict. Then we'll discover some common conflict resolution styles. And then we'll learn about techniques that will help us effectively manage that conflict that we've recognized. Take a look at these pictures. These are various images of what we would say are conflict situations. Whether it's someone who is yelling in an argument at a meeting, whether it's someone who's hiding because he or she just does not want to deal with conflict, or you have these images of constant tug of wars or struggles or the arm wrestlings. And then you have, as in the case of the hands talking to the hands, you have people talking, someone's listening, but are you really listening to each other, or are you just yelling? Which one of these situations can you most relate to? Which one of these situations are you commonly in or currently in? Perhaps you feel as though this gentleman is, where it's just too much. You can't deal with it. There's so much going on, so much conflict that you just want to scream. But let's get a definition of conflict to kind of set some ground rules, and will help us throughout the rest of this webinar. When I refer to conflict, I'm talking about mental struggle that results from opposing needs, drives, wishes, or even those internal or external demands. That conflict, it's something that manifests itself based upon your individual perceptions and how you deal with stress. So those images that we saw prior here, these are outward manifestations of the stress and conflict in which you experience. So how do you recognize conflict? What are some of the signs? Now, I put all these up at one time because for some people, they experience all these things at one time. We can typically recognize conflict within ourselves when we get those butterflies or stomach pains. Sometimes it's headaches, sleepless nights, stuttering, nervous twitches, fidgeting. Sometimes it's silence. Some of us break out in cold sweats. For some, it's just mere confrontation and conflict and argument. But whatever it is, these are the ways in which we recognize conflict, the outward manifestations of the conflict that we're experiencing. So how do you recognize the conflict? First of all, it's important to remember that conflict arises from differences. That's a very key point. Conflict arises from differences and are rooted in an individual's perception on their interests, their style, ethics, and personality. These are just four that I mentioned, but I'm sure that there are many other that you can think about, but it's a very individual perception on conflict. It's how we perceive things. So how do you recognize the conflict that we're experiencing? Two things. We might experience personal conflict. That's the conflict in which we have conflicts with ourselves, with our colleagues, with friends or family. And the second kind of conflict that I'll talk about are the organizational type of conflict. That's the conflict that you have that are managerial, departmental, or maybe project-wise. Now, I want to note that when I say organizational conflict and I have managerial listed, I'm not referring specifically to your manager or your supervisor. It's managerial in the sense of organization, managerial in the sense of the processes and the hierarchy within and the rules that you have to deal with. A lot of us experience that conflict from the organization through our manager, but it's not really our manager that we have the conflict with. It's generally more so the processes, the rules, or the procedures that the manager is trying to enforce. But at the end of the day, how we recognize that conflict, whether it's personal or organizational, really depends upon our values. And again, we talk about the values and our ethics and our interests and our style or personality. What's important to us dictates how we recognize the conflict that we experience. What are some styles that are used to address conflict? The model that I have here is really a combination between the Thomas Kilmann and the Kenichi Kreitner models, where it's on the continuum of dealing with others versus expressing yourself. The style that you use will greatly depend upon these two things. And I'm going to put all of the styles up at once, and then in the remaining slides, I'll go through them one by one as I address questions that you've sent in. Dealing with others, expressing yourself. If you don't want to deal with others and you really don't want to express yourself, then the style that you use to address conflict is avoidance. You avoid those situations. And on the other end, if you really want to deal with others, that's accommodating. If you don't want to deal with others, but you're very strong in expressing yourself, that's what we call authoritative. Then you can collaborate. But this green area, and one of the ways in which we really try to get to addressing conflict is by compromising, because that's the win-win situation. That's kind of right in the middle. Now, compromise may not be the best in every situation in dealing with conflict, but it definitely is something that we all should strive to get to when addressing conflict, is the state of compromise. So as I said, I'll spend the rest of the time answering a few questions that were submitted before the webinar started. Someone sent in the question and asked, can you have several conflict styles? And so what I did is I took the conflict styles and put them in a chart, when to use them and when not to use them. And I'll use this to address the questions for the remainders of the session. So, can you have several conflict resolution style? The answer is yes. It really depends upon the situation, when you should use them and when you should not use them. Conflict style of avoidance, when should you use that particular style or that particular method? Use the avoidance method when the confrontation, the likelihood of confrontation is greater than a benefit that could be gained by addressing the conflict. When you should not avoid the conflict, however, is if it's a very difficult problem. And that happens too many times. We'd rather just not deal with it and think that it'll go away. when in actuality the opposite happens. It just tends to build and build, and eventually it gets to the point where it explodes, and that's not good for anyone. The situation is probably going to be worse than it was in the very beginning had we not avoided it. Authoritative. When would you want to use an authoritative conflict style? You want to use this style when an unpopular solution must be implemented. When should you not use this style? You shouldn't be authoritative when it's an operative and a participative climate. If conflict is present and the environment is one where you're encouraging people to speak their minds and contribute solutions, the authoritative style, if there is a conflict, should never be used in this type, because that doesn't give people the opportunity to participate. What it actually does is it shuts people down, and it makes them not want to participate, not be involved, and it could lead to them implementing other conflict styles in the future, such as avoidance. Here's another question. How do you impartially resolve conflict between two very productive employees? Here's our chart again. We have all our conflict styles. We have when to use and when not to use. Which conflict style would be best suited for this particular instance? Authoritative, because you are in a position of authority if these are your employees. And if the employees aren't able to resolve the issue amongst themselves, then that's when it's time for you to step in. It's a very unpopular solution that must be implemented. It's a touchy situation, but again, as a leader, as your role as a leader, as an employer, two very productive employees, that's when the authoritative style should be implemented. Next question. How do you manage conflict with people you work with and consider to be friends? How many of you actually consider yourselves to have friends in the workplace and have actually had a conflict? How have you dealt with those situations? It's not the most comfortable thing to deal with because, as the question states, these are people that you consider your friends. But it does happen. Conflict amongst friends in the workplace happens more often than we like to realize. But when this particular situation happens, which conflict style should be best? Two things: collaboration or compromise. The first thing is collaborating. It is a complex issue. It's complex because there's more at stake than just the conflict itself, than just the matter at hand. Because you state that you are friends, then if the conflict is not resolved, then there's another issue that stands to be lost, and that's the friendship. There's the potential for being a strain in the friendship. A strain in the friendship could lead to further strain at work and non-productivity, uncomfortable environments. So what you want to strive to do in this particular situation is to collaborate. You also want to compromise. Again, you're friends. There isn't an employee, employer, manager, direct report relationship involved here. You're saying that you're friends, so that would lead me to believe that you're in equal power positions. So if you are equal power positions, again, it is a complex issue. How do you resolve or how do you manage that conflict? You guys need to sit and chat. And what are you willing to give? What is the other person willing to give? Communication is key to really get to the heart of the issue of what's going on so that you can understand what each party can contribute to the solution. You want to compromise and you want to collaborate. Both of you have something that you can give to make the situation better, but you also have something that you can give up to make the situation better as well. There's some key points to remember when you're talking about managing conflict. All of us really want to get to this place of peace. No one likes to have conflict. No one really wants to have to deal with those internal struggles because it's uneasy. It's not a good feeling. We have too many other things that we want to be doing in our day-to-day jobs that conflict is just not one of those things that we wake up in the morning and saying, hey, I'm going to have conflict this morning. Let's see, how can I make myself have more conflict? On the contrary, most of us probably wake up saying, I really hope that I don't experience conflict today. But a couple of points to remember to help you deal with the conflict that you may experience. How do you get to that place of peace? If you experience any conflict, or if you even feel that conflict is coming on, one of the first things that I recommend is get to your quiet place. Mentally, take a step back and get to the place where you can be calm. Sometimes it means just taking a few moments of pause and silence, but whatever it takes to get you to that place of peace and tranquility, that sets you up for dealing with the conflict better, so you're not reacting and irrational, but you can actually utilize some of the styles and the techniques that you've learned thus far to address and manage that conflict. Key points to remember though. Conflict is more than just a disagreement. I can't stress this point enough. Conflict is not just a disagreement. Conflict is really an internal struggle of opposing views. When conflict arises, it typically is because I believe in something or you believe in something and our values have been compromised, or our values have been called to question. And no one likes for their values to be called to question. That's when conflict arises. If conflict were just a disagreement, it would be really simple to have the disagreement, the argument, and then we move on. But that's not the case. Conflict must be addressed and dealt with so that it doesn't grow and grow into something larger. We respond to the conflicts based upon our perceptions of the situation. And again, it's how I view it. Most people say perception is reality, but we each have a different perspective on a situation. Who's right, who's wrong? That's not really the question. The real question and the solution is, how can we come to resolving the conflict, though we have different perceptions or different views of the situation? How we respond to conflict, our style, ultimately influences the growth opportunity. This is a professional development seminar. We're talking about conflict. We're talking about recognizing, and we're also talking about managing the conflict. So of course, it stands to reason that there's always an opportunity for growth. And how you deal with the conflict that you face in your workplace or in your personal space really does dictate and influence how you are growing and the growth opportunities. If you're wanting to be in more of a leadership roles, then people are observing you. Your management is observing you now and how you deal with conflict. If you can deal with conflict in small situations and you are shown to handle those small situations of conflict very well, then you will be given opportunities in larger opportunities. But if you can't handle conflict well in the smallest of situations or those one-on-one situations, then may not be the best time for you to take on additional responsibility where there is constant conflict or conflict that's coming in various different forms or fashions. You want to make sure that you practice these now, and as you continue to grow, you will be able to receive those opportunities. And finally, and most importantly, how you manage the conflict. Sometimes you've got to know just when to let it go. It's not always about me being right sometimes with the conflict. Sometimes let it go and move on. You're not compromising your values by letting it go. You're just being the better person or bigger person and showing your growth and maturity. You're using a style, potentially the avoidance, but you're letting it go and you're not allowing that disagreement to fester. Another way of saying it could be, don't major in the minor of things. when it comes to conflict. Let it go. Have the peace. Get to your peaceful place. Well, hopefully you've learned something about recognizing conflict and managing conflict that will help you in your day-to-day work life or activities, your personal or organizational life. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in. We have a few more minutes before our 30 minutes are up for today, and so I would welcome other questions that you have. So please just kind of type them in if need be. But if there are no questions, I invite you to email me at mqualls@contropiansconsulting.com. Visit my website. Go to my Facebook page. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and actually have some video blogs posted on YouTube that you can view. What I try to do and what we try to do at Entropia is provide you with professional development tips, resources. A lot of it is information that I've received or seen, and I'll just kind of share it with my audience so that they can benefit it as well as they can benefit it, so that they can benefit from the information as much as I have. Because at the end of the day, Entropia is really about helping you grow to become more effective and more efficient and achieve that work-life balance. And hopefully you've learned something today about managing and recognizing the conflict around you that will help you grow professionally. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you next month.